Welcome back to Children of the Light by Michael Mastrella. This is Chapter 4, and this will be the last time that I interfere with my own commentary. After this, everything will be an official audiobook release, and the reason I'm interfering one last time is to let you know that the full ebook is available at patreon.com/michaelmastrella, where eventually the full audiobook will be available too in its official form. And the link for that is in the description. So let's get right into Chapter 4, Dr. Hobbs. Quote, "Working for a life without pain is a waste of life. How you deal with pain is what makes you who you are." Unquote. Arnie Cuddebuck, Why I Did It. Mr. Davidson turned left off of Route 25 in Juniper. Jason Tosh. 14 Lane Road, or was it Road Lane? Anyway, the two-lane blacktop they followed was neither. But Juniper was a residential village without a business district. You could walk the length of every street in an afternoon. Don tried to spot and memorize every sign and landmark. Route 25 to Willow Lane, over a shallow creek, apartment complex to the left, trailer park to the right, past Lower West Road, a farmhouse here, a barn there, and between everything, as if adhering the landmarks, were trees. The trees could be a means of escape, a dangerous means, but more predictable than the people that lived in this town, of whom she knew none, other than perhaps Jason Tosh, who might not be in the best mood. As they turned right onto Upper East Road, Don strained to see if there were more intersections further north on Willow, but all she could see was darkness. Lane Road must be south of Route 25. "It's been a comfortable silence," Mr. Davidson said, startling her. "You'll fit right in, Mrs. Foley." The second farmhouse on the right. Don knew before they even turned onto the driveway. There was a dim glow coming from within that barn and several vehicles parked outside of it. The house itself was dark inside, a single pickup truck next to it. Similar to bank robberies and mob meetings, this group had a lookout post. No one was visible in the farmhouse or the truck, but as they approached the barn and the headlights shined on the vehicles parked there, Don noticed that every one had at least a driver. A red van, a blue sports car, and a red four-door. It was near impossible to see more than silhouettes once the beams from Davidson's Caprice passed by. It was the night of a new moon, and that was probably the intention. Don's guts began to quiver. On top of Mr. Davidson's pathology, Mrs. Davidson's firearm, and the innocent girl in the trunk they claimed to be their daughter, she now had a minimum of 3 extra unknowns to deal with at a dark farm 20 miles from home. She needed more. Why is everyone sitting in their cars? "The good doctor likes to wait around until everyone has arrived," said Mr. Davidson as he pulled into a spot beside the red four-door. "Then we all go in together." "Is that what I call him, the good doctor?" "Dr. Hobbs, or since he's looking forward to seeing you, call him Elroy." This was a lot to memorize, with no way of discerning the information needed to get home. Beyond the barn was darkness and the mile of trees that stood between her and Route 25. She heard a car door open and close. She saw a figure move in front of the vehicles. The figure appeared to survey the vehicles before speaking, and spoke with the voice of a leader, charismatic and full of controlled energy. "All right, everyone, grab your shit and get." A strange introduction. Mr. Davidson said, "That's our cue. Mrs. Foley, you follow me. Honey, you follow Mrs. Foley." Mr. Davidson popped the trunk and made his way to the rear of the house with ease. Don had a tougher time navigating the darkness. There was a faint yellow glow from the light in the barn, but she still had to keep a hand on the Caprice while sidling around the front end of the vehicle. As soon as she stopped to wait at the hood, Mrs. Davidson's muzzle found the middle of her spine and stayed there. It hadn't been much contact, but felt as though the gun were electrified, sending pulses through her torso. Being held at gunpoint by a blind woman. Sure, the blind woman had the advantage in the dark, in a familiar environment, with plenty of premeditation and backup. But no one would understand any of that. If this had ever happened to someone who lived through it, they would never admit the truth. It was too embarrassing. Mr. Davidson slammed the trunk of his Caprice with an elbow or a foot. Cradling the girl he'd removed, he walked by on his way around the barn. He and the others knew exactly where to go, meaning they convened here regularly. Don followed, and the muzzle remained firmly planted in her spine. A strange relief came over her when she entered the barn. There was light inside, and she could better see what she was dealing with. The light emanated from a squat, dome-shaped fire pit centered on the dirt floor. Several haystacks circled the cage. To the right was a hayloft. Knock the fire pit into the hay and burn her way out? No, not with an unconscious girl present. And damn it, not with the pigs squealing and the pin to her left. She needed more information before she burned a bunch of animals alive. Both the hayloft and the pig pen dimmed into darkness, so attempting to escape through either of those would be a gamble. The squealing from the pen had reached a frenzy when they'd entered, she realized, and anyone who stepped in there would likely be eaten for their troubles. Backlit by the fire, Hobbs had one hand on his hip and used the other to shake the hands of those who came in front of him, until the Davidsons. Someone closed the barn door, and the firelight bounced off of it to give a more detailed look at Dr. Hobbs. He stood about 5'4" tops, with a stocky build. He had to be in his 70s, though his eyes blazed with the intensity of a much younger man. Mr. Davidson offered the hand of the arm that was cradling his daughter's head. Dr. Hobbs? Hobbs kept both hands on his hips and spoke with a gusto that paled all the passion that Mr. Davidson had been spewing for the past 30 minutes. God damn it, Willie, please tell me that the gentling in your arms isn't your beautiful, precious, jail-baiting daughter. Please tell me that, Willie. That caught Mr. Davidson off guard. He hadn't stuttered, stammered, or flinched from his complicated and somewhat ridiculous plan in the time Don had known him, not once. He towered over Hobbs physically, but looked up to him mentally and emotionally. As he said, "It's what I thought you wanted." Hobbs was quick. He slapped Davidson hard across the face, scratched his own cheek, and put the hand back on his hip. Mr. Davidson seemed unhurt physically, but the deeper pain of humiliation was evident behind his blank expression. "It's what I thought you would do." Hobbs backhanded Davidson, adjusted his own trousers, hands to his hips. No one said anything. The amicable mumblings that had begun as everyone crowded into the barn had halted. Mr. Davidson appeared to be choosing his next words very carefully. Mrs. Davidson felt the need to support her husband. "Elroy, we were only doing what you—" "Willie, tell your hole to start a stink trap, or so help me God, I will rape her. I'll rape her, Willie." "Honey," Mr. Davidson said, "it's okay. Dr. Hobbs, my daughter had—" Dr. Hobbs had already begun a slow, deliberate wind-up as soon as Mr. Davidson said his name, and he threw his entire body into this slap, his feet leaving the ground with the momentum of it. It was surprisingly limber for a man of his age, and the sound of the impact stirred the pigs. Then he straightened his sweater, pulled up his own trousers, and set his palms where he liked them best. "I guess you're wondering why I'm hitting you, Willie." Willie Davidson had seen the big wind-up, had adequate time and power to evade it, even with a girl in his arms, but he had taken it. The blow was enough to stagger him. It was easy to imagine Mr. Davidson lifting Dr. Hobbs over his head without a gasp and snapping him in half over his knee like the baseball players sometimes did to their bats in the games Adam watched. All Mr. Davidson did, though, was straighten himself up and say, "Yes." "Well, it's not only because I love to whack my Willie, I'll tell you that. What the hell am I supposed to think of a man who would have the gall to bring his own daughter, his own flesh and blood, the spawn of his spade? If you would turn on the creature you brought into the world, God damn it, Willie, how can I trust you not to turn on the rest of us?" "You can trust me, Dr. Hobbs." "Willie, you brought this child into the world only to teach her that it's such a lowly world that she can't even trust the man she's supposed to trust the most." "She didn't trust me. That's the problem. She didn't trust either of us." "Quit babbling, you lughead, and get to the point. We're trying to show the kids that this is a good world, and you seem to be undermining the very foundation of that logic, Willie. And what happens when you undermine a foundation, Willie?" Mr. Davidson had a respite, evidently thinking the question rhetorical. "Come on, Willie, don't tell me your parents wasted their money on your Ivy League education. What happens when you undermine a foundation, Willie?" "It collapses." "It collapses, just like your knees are going to collapse after I kick your nuts into your guts if you don't tell me how this undermines our foundation, Willie." Don was actually grateful for the first time in this whole business. Dealing with the Davidsons had been an easier route. The fire in Hobbs's eyes were suns compared to Willie's flickering candles. And she might not have to face it herself, since Hobbs was against the Davidsons' plan so far. And how would he react when learning they had also brought an unknown, unwilling police officer into the mix? "She had Dracula in her room, Dr. Hobbs, okay? After what happened to my wife, our daughter goes out and brings Dracula into our home? How do you expect us to take that?" Don saw a chance here and said, "Maybe your hatred of the myth is what attracted her to it." Now Dr. Hobbs's eyes were on her. He was her height, which should have given him a level stare. Instead, he lowered his gaze while keeping focus directly on her pupils so that the whites of his eyes showed beneath the blue irises. He stepped past Mr. Davidson until he was nearly nose to nose with Don. Though he held a stern veneer, a slight smile dimpled his cheeks. This was a man who was amused by conflict. And a psychotic urge to kiss him for his treatment of the Davidsons was easily repressed. Hobbs gave her a moment to reconsider that thought, then nodded. You think forbidding them something enhances their desire for it? Not exactly, she said. It depends on the person. Uh-huh, Hobbs said, taking a hand from his hip to scoop the air as if pulling more words from her mouth. Elaborate on your thesis, citing specific examples. My husband and I, she began, then hesitated. Would Hobbs warm to a tale of domestic bliss or use it against her? The Davidsons were using it to their advantage, threatening her family. Hobbs had done nothing but contradict the Davidsons so far. Maybe the threat against the Foleys was purely a concoction of the Davidsons. Maybe Willie lacked the mental chops of this Hobbs that he admired so much and had to construct an easy threat to get his way. Hobbs wasn't having it, and he wouldn't stand for Don's indecision either. So she took the gamble. My husband and I were raised in entirely different families, but we have the same values. His parents were all for a lifetime of, fidelity and devotion, and cheating and promiscuity were forbidden. My parents fooled around and betrayed each other and taught me never to trust anyone as they had, to never give yourself over to one person because they will betray you too. My husband heeded the advice of his parents, and I was tempted to pursue what my parents forbade. She shrugged. It depends on the person. Hobbs nodded shortly. And you 100% know that your husband has been loyal to you as you've been to him? The subject always rattled her nerves. It was one of her greatest fears that he'd fall out of love with her, be afraid to tell her while kindling a new romance on the side. No, she said, and swallowed. I don't know. I trust it. Because you love him? Yes. Her back was throbbing at this point, as it did whenever holding a posture for extended periods. Gravity made her spine coil in on itself like a snake without the flexibility. So it was more like a snake had bitten her and the poison was seeping into her muscles. And what do you think that poor girl in this douchebag's arms feels right now? The worst heartbreak of her life? Hobbs analyzed her answer, thinking something he chose not to say. The worst heartbreak of her life. And would you follow someone who imposed such an agony upon you? I would defy that someone. You would. She would. Any thinking, feeling human with a sane and rational mind would. You're a smart cookie, rookie. Good to have you with us. She thought, I'm not with you, but kept it to herself. Hobbs was turning to Davidson without having attacked her in any way, so she let that happen. Now, Hobbs said to Davidson, after what our little discussion has just proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, how, Willie, can you bring your daughter in this manner and then expect her to comprehend your views? Mr. Davidson took a big breath. I didn't bring her to comprehend my views. She's past that. You know what she said about it? You know why I have to sedate her? You know why I brought her? His cadence, Don noted, was a cheap imitation of Dr. Hobbs. Mr. Davidson desperately wanted to be like the man, but Hobbs was a fast talker, and the attempt to be poetically repetitious just wasn't working with Mr. Davidson's slower warble. It merely added unnecessary, annoying suspense while waiting for him to reach his point, and Don saw ways of using that against him as well. She said, I don't see what the big deal is. I don't see what the big deal is, Dr. Hobbs. She doesn't get it. She won't get it. It's not even that good, she said. I don't see why anyone would be influenced by it, she said. Thousands upon thousands of titles have perpetuated the idea, and she can't see why anyone would be influenced. So you brought her here not as a mule, but as a lamb. I have no choice, Dr. Hobbs. And our fine police officer here, she's the mule? It makes perfect sense. Yes, it does. I can see the pain in her eyes that she so despairingly hopes to control so we won't know her weaknesses. I'm getting misty over here watching her struggle, Willie. There was a smattering of laughter from the others in the barn, apparently sensing that the discord between Hobbs and Davidson had passed, that it was okay to laugh at the jibe. Oh, Willie, what am I going to do with you and your alpha male complex? Alpha male complex? You're telling me you didn't pop her one? An attitude like she has, and intelligence to boot? It wasn't long before she threatened your top dog status in the car, was it? You had to strike her down to size. I mean, that lip isn't naturally lopsided, is it, sweetheart? No, sir, Don answered, amazed to find herself calling someone sir in a completely serious manner. It must have sounded legitimate, too, since no one questioned her sincerity. Willie, 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 said Hobbs, shaking his head but keeping his eyes on Don. Well, let's hurry up and convert Mrs. Foley so we can get on with things. and he came casually toward her again and stopped at the same uncomfortable distance as before. Her hand instinctively went for the holster, which was in the ditch along Route 25. "Mrs. Foley," he said softly, "I want you to trust me. Do you trust me?" "I'm sorry, but the way I was brought here makes that somewhat difficult. No offense." "None taken. You were abducted at gunpoint and brought to a group you could have lived the rest of your life happy never knowing existed. But you're unharmed, except for Willie and his little insecurity attack, that is. But I haven't harmed you, and you see how much thought went into getting you here safe and alive." Yeah, she thought, serial killers keep their intended victims alive too until they get what they want from them. Then they kill them. She said, "I do see that." "I'm going to convert you now, Rook. Do you trust me?" Well, what choice did she have? "As far as I can see you, Dr. Hobbs." "Fair enough, fair maiden. Then keep your eyes on me. I won't leave your sight. Look at me as I reach around your back." He did as he said, his fingers crawling around the curve of her spine. The expression on his face was clinical, like a doctor listening for a pulse. It was fitting he'd be the leader of a group that supposedly supported life over the draining of life. He was bursting at the seams with life. From this close, it seemed to emanate from him, to leak out of his pores in particles that were contagious. Hobbs's fingers halted over the problem area, the fault line where her spine gradually slipped out of place over the course of a day. His palm suctioned down on that spot, a knobby palm full of little bulbous muscles. "Look at me." Unaware that her gaze had drifted, she looked at him. "Taking a deep breath?" As she did, Hobbs applied pressure to her spine. There was a thud, a dull jolt, as if a giant fist had slammed into her back to knock a piece of food from her windpipe. She exhaled sharply, as if a blockage really had been removed. There was a freeing sensation, a knot untied, a burn splashed with cold water. An undulating coolness was now located where there had been nothing but pain for more than 10 years. She was numb. Her knees went watery, lost their strength. The jolt had straightened her upright, and now she was falling. Hobbs lowered her gently to the wooden floor. "He paralyzed me," she thought. "How could I have just stood there and let him do that? Now I'll never walk again, and they can do whatever they want to me. It was all just a big trip. Just a big trick." But she was able to reach out and support herself. She was able to roll out of Hobbs's grip and sit up, palms flat on the floorboards. Her torso was twisted 90 degrees from her hips, yet there was neither the flaring of hyperextension nor the relief of stretching. There was nothing at all. She rotated carefully to sit crisscross applesauce. Nothing. Was there nerve damage? She swiveled her feet, crunched the toes. She twirled her wrists and flexed the fingers, mildly uneasy about losing control when she'd been trying so hard to appear formidable. But she kept testing even the smallest of her limbs and joints, afraid that if she stopped, they might never move again. Afraid that this was some sort of physical or mental breakdown caused by whatever Hobbs had done to her. Dr. Hobbs. There was definitely something different, disturbingly different, in the spinal faults, and the more she moved her limbs, the clearer it became. They felt the same. Her back felt the same as the rest of her body. For most of her life, the hunchback there had been like a volcano, a wicked knot of molten agony that erupted when the plates shifted around too much. It would have been just as surprising to watch a volcano sucked into the earth and plates replaced by a calm, cool pond. The good doctor. What had always been there was gone. It was almost like losing a limb. What she lived with, grown accustomed to, and even used to her advantage a few times was not there. Testing it again with the rolling of the shoulders, throwing them back and forth to their limits, they both hit walls of elasticity without pain. The misery of being limited by pain was now smooth functioning. A memory of Adam fixing the sliding glass door to the yard, replacing the ball bearings, oiling the joints, and lining the edges with a layer of padding. And then the door to the little garden, once threatening to dislocate and shatter with each movement, now slid smoothly and quietly. She couldn't wait to tell Adam. A door to a better life has opened, she thought. And when everyone laughed again, she realized that one of her cheesiest thoughts ever had been spoken aloud. Moving around like a woman practically possessed or being exorcised, the demon that had haunted her life had been purged. "What did you do to me?" Her voice was shaky. It was the same question she'd asked God so many times before accepting that there was no answer. It's just something that happened. Every plop into the car seat, every long work week that spoiled the weekend, no answer. Slept the wrong way, bent the wrong way, spun too fast, no answer. It was just something that happened, and now it was gone. Why should there be an answer for that? What did you do to me? She asked again after they were finished laughing. Converted you, Ruck, said Dr. Hobbs, smiling with the triumph of a doctor who has successfully delivered a baby. Gave you one less thing to whine about. Doesn't it feel good? Yes. Now you see, said Mr. Davidson, we are children of the light. It is far better to be given life than to be drained of it, wouldn't you agree? Yes, Don said, very quietly. If she spoke much more, she very well might cry, but she had to know. How did you do it, and why me? Hobbs waved it away and patted the haystack that happened to be next to him. Grab a seat, Rook. We normally cover these things in our little meetings. Dawn pulled her knees up to her chest and rocked, ensuring that whatever hadn't worn off. Hobbs thought she needed help. Barry, don't let her sit there like a pile of pig shit. Get her up. It's okay, Dawn said. Let me. And as she got to her feet and then sat on one of the haystacks, her muscles and joints worked with the smooth elasticity she hadn't experienced since childhood.